She grabbed my wrist at that dinner table and pulled me forward like I was a piece of furniture she was apologizing for. Daddy, this is Walter, she said, Ethan's father. He's a broke old dirt farmer from outside Bozeman. 40 people heard it, my son heard it, and my son said nothing. I stood there with my hand out to a man in a $4,000 suit, and I smiled, and I said, pleasure to meet you, Richard. What that girl didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the deal her father had been chasing for 11 months, the one that would make or break his firm, had one signature line on it. Mine. If you're watching this, do me a favor. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story traveled. And if you believe respect ought to come before you find out what a man's worth, subscribe and stay with me. Because it gets worse before it gets better. She grabbed my wrist. That's the part people don't understand when I tell this story. They think the words were the worst of it. They weren't. It was the hand. She reached across that white tablecloth, closed her fingers around my wrist, like I was a child, wandered off, and pulled me toward her father. I'm 67 years old. I have not been pulled anywhere since I was 9. Daddy, she said. Daddy, wait. Before you sit down, this is Walter. Richard Collins turned around with a glass in his hand. Walter, Victoria said, Ethan's father. And then she laughed. A little laugh, the kind that fills silence. He's a broke old dirt farmer from outside Bozeman. I want to be exact here, because I've replayed it about 4,000 times since. She didn't whisper it. She didn't lean in and say it just to him. She said it at a volume that carried, table of 40. Rehearsal dinner, crystal candles, a string trio in the corner playing something soft. And the room did that thing rooms do, it didn't go silent. It got quieter, like everybody turned the dial down 2 clicks so they could hear what happened next without appearing to listen. Richard shifted his glass to his left hand and put out his right. Well, he said, nothing wrong with honest work. I shook his hand, good grip, manicured nails, a watch on him that cost more than my first tractor. Pleasure to meet you, Richard, I said, Richard Collins. Walter Hayes. He held the shake a second longer than he needed to, and he did the thing men like him do. He looked down at my hand while he was shaking it. At the knuckles, at the split in the skin across the back of my thumb that never fully closes anymore, October through March. Then he looked at my boots, then back up at my face with a smile that had been assembled rather than felt. Hayes, he said, that's right, cattle? Some hard business it is. My father-in-law had a place in Nebraska. Little operation. He loved it. He tipped his glass slightly. Ran it into the ground, but he loved it, and that was it. That was the whole conversation. He turned to a man on his left, said something about a flight out of Denver, and I was standing there holding a hand that wasn't there anymore. Now here's what I need you to understand about that moment. I wasn't angry. I've been angry. I know what it feels like. It's hot. It's fast. It makes your ears ring. This wasn't that. This was something colder and slower. This was the feeling of being filed. Of watching a man decide, in under 4 seconds, exactly how much of his attention you were going to be worth for the rest of his life. I looked past him for my son. Ethan was standing 8 feet away with a beer in his hand, talking to one of Victoria's cousins. He'd heard. I know he heard, because when she said broke old dirt farmer, his shoulders came up about half an inch and stayed there. And he did not turn around. That's the wound, not her. Him, let me back up, because you deserve to know how I ended up in that room. My name is Walter Hayes. I've lived on the same piece of ground outside Bozeman, Montana for 41 years. My wife Margaret died 6 years ago this past March. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the funeral, and I was there for every hour of it, including the ones nobody talks about. We had one son, Ethan. Ethan is 34. He is smart in a way I am not. He went to school in Denver, got a degree in finance, and now hides something with commercial portfolios that I have had explained to me 6 separate times and could not repeat back to you under oath. He is not a bad man. I want that on the record early, because there's a stretch of this story where you're going to want to write him off, and I'd ask you not to. He called me on a Tuesday in April. I was in the barn. I remember because I had a heifer with a bad hoof, and my hands were filthy, and I answered anyway, which tells you something about how often that boy called. Day, you busy? Always. Go ahead. I asked Victoria to marry me. I set down what I was holding, wiped my hand on my jeans. Took a second. She say yes? She said yes. Well, my throat did something unexpected. That's good news. You okay? Ed, I'm fine. You sound weird. I'm standing in a barn, Ethan. Ed, I sound like a barn, he laughed. God, I love that laugh. Ed, he got it from his mother, this short, surprised bark, like humor snuck up on him every time. Ed, I wish he started. I know. Yeah, she'd have driven you crazy about it, I said. Ed, she'd have had the whole thing planned inside of a week. Ed, napkins and everything. Yeah, she would have. We sat there in it for a second. Ed, then he said, Dad, listen, her family's there a lot. Ed, her dad's a big deal in Denver real estate. Her mom's Ed, her mom's particular. I just want it to go well. Ed, and there it was. Right there 4 minutes into the conversation. Ed, I just want it to go well. He wasn't asking me to be happy for him. Ed, he was asking me to be manageable. I should have said something then. Ed, I didn't. It'll go fine, I said. Ed, met Victoria 6 weeks later. They drove up from Denver on a Saturday, and we went to a steakhouse in Bozeman, the good one on Main, because I figured a girl from that world would want a tablecloth. Ed, she was beautiful. I'll give her that without any bitterness at all. Ed, 29, dark hair, that kind of posture people pay money to learn. Ed, and she was polite, that's the thing. She was so polite it took me a full hour to understand what was happening. Ed, Mr. Hayes, Ethan's told me so much about you. Walter's fine. Ed, Walter, she smiled. Walter, we ordered. She asked about the ranch. Ed, how many acres is it? Enough to keep me busy. She laughed politely. Ed, Ethan said, Dad. What? She asked question. Ed and I answered it. Victoria touched Ethan's arm. Ed, it's fine. Then to me, I've just never been on a real ranch. Ed, is it hard financially? Now I want you to sit with that question for a second. Ed, first dinner, meeting your fiancé's widowed father for the first time in your life. Ed, and the second thing out of your mouth is it hard financially? Ed, some years, I said. Ethan said you do it all yourself. Ed, I've got 2 hands that come in for calving and haying. Ed, that's amazing. She said amazing the way you'd say it to a child who showed you a drawing. Ed, honestly, it's so refreshing. Everyone I know is so everything's about money with them. Ed, it's exhausting. Like my father. He can't have a conversation without it turning into a deal. Ed, that's so. You'd hate him. She laughed. I mean that in a good way. Ed, the check came. I reached for it and she put her hand flat on the leather folder. Ed, oh no, please. I've got it, Walter, seriously. Ed, Victoria. I kept my voice easy. I've been buying my son dinner since he had teeth. Ed, let me buy his girl one. She looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the table. Ed, okay, she said. Thank you. Then, as we were standing up, she said, and I swear she thought she was being kind, we'll get the next one. Ed, a nice one. We walked out to the parking lot. Ed, my truck was there, the Ford F350, gray where it's still paint and brown where it isn't. Ed, 290,000 miles on it. Margaret and I hauled a horse trailer to Idaho and back in that truck the summer before she got sick. Ed, Victoria stopped walking. Is that yours? That's mine. Ed, oh my God, that is so you. She meant it as a compliment. Ed, that's the part that still gets me. She genuinely, sincerely meant it as a compliment, the way you'd compliment a barn quilt or a jar of homemade jam. Ed, something charming, something rustic, something that belonged in a photograph and not in her life. Ed, Ethan hugged me goodbye and said quietly, Ed, near my ear, Ed, thanks for tonight, Dad. Ed, you were great, like I'd auditioned. Ed, the Denver dinner was in August. Their house is in Cherry Hills. Ed, you come up a driveway that curves so you can't see the whole house at once. It reveals itself in pieces, which I've since learned is on purpose, architecturally. Ed, there was a man at the door whose entire job appeared to be the door. Ed, Claire Collins met me in the entryway. Walter, welcome, both hands out, taking mine. Ed, we are so glad you made the drive. Happy too. That's what 9 hours. Ed, about that, by yourself, by myself, well, aren't you hardy? She said it to the room more than to me. Ed, Richard, he drove 9 hours. Richard came around the corner. Ed, Walter, good to finally put a face to it, likewise. Ed, drink, water's fine, nothing? Come on, water's fine, thank you. Ed, he doesn't drink, Ethan said quickly from somewhere behind me. Ed, I drink, I said. I just don't drink and drive 9 hours in the morning. Ed, Richard laughed. Actual laugh, that one. Fair enough. Ed, for about 20 minutes, I thought it might go all right. Ed, then we sat down to dinner and the questions started, and I finally understood that this was not a dinner. Ed, this was an appraisal. So Walter, Richard, buttering bread. Ed, the ranch, what are we talking acreage-wise? Little over 3,000 deeded. Ed, his butter knife paused, just for a beat. 3,000. Ed, little over. That's where exactly? Gallatin. South end of the valley, out toward the foothills. And you run cattle on all that? On some, lease some. Rest sits. Claire, from the end of the table, isn't that terribly expensive, just to have? Taxes aren't nothing. Because we looked at land in Montana, she went on. Years ago, for a second place. Richard said the numbers never work. Numbers work if you're patient, I said. Richard set the knife down. Patient how? And I'll be honest with you, that was the moment. Right there. I could have opened the door. I could have said, patient like buying adjoining parcels between 1987 and 2006 from ranchers who were done and tired and needed out. Patient like sitting on ground everybody said was worthless while the valley grew toward me one subdivision at a time. Patient like turning down 4 offers because none of them wanted to farm it, they wanted to pave it. I could have said all that. I said patient like old. Everybody laughed. Richard picked his knife back up. And the door closed. I've thought about why I didn't say it. Pride partly, but more than that, Margaret. Margaret used to say, Walt, the second you tell somebody what you've got, you never find out who they are. She said it about a neighbor once, back in '94, who got real friendly with us, the same week the paper ran a piece about land values. She was right about him, and she was right in general, and I have run my whole life on that rule. The problem with that rule is that it also means you never find out who you are to them. Until you do. Claire brought out photo albums after dessert. Victoria's christening, Victoria's ballet recitals. Victoria at some horse show in Kentucky in a black coat with her hair in a net. You ride? I asked her. I did. Hunter jumpers for like 10 years. I've got horses. Oh, like ranch horses. Like horses. Right, no, I know. Just mean, she made a small motion with her hand. It's a different thing, it is, I agreed. Mine work. Dad, what? Hers didn't work. Mine do. That's not an insult. That's a fact. Richard laughed again. Second time that night. I was starting to understand that Richard laughed when he wanted a topic to die. Later, while Claire was showing Ethan something in the kitchen, Victoria sat down next to me on the couch. Can I ask you something? Sure. Are you okay with all this? She gestured vaguely at the room, at the house, at everything. I know it's a lot, and Ethan says you're really private. I'm fine, because I want us to be close, she said. I never had grandparents, really, and my dad's family is anyway. I want us to be close, and I believed her. That's what I want you to understand about Victoria Collins. She was not a villain. If she'd been a villain, this story would be easier, and I'd have slept better. She was a young woman who had been raised in a house where the first question about a person was what do they have, and the second question was what can they do for us. And she had absorbed that so completely she didn't know it was a language. She thought it was just how people talked. She meant it when she said she wanted us to be close. She just also meant it 4 months later when she called me a broke old dirt farmer in front of 40 people. Both things were true. That's what made it hurt. The wedding was set for Jackson Hole. 2 weeks before, Ethan called me. Dad, quick thing about the suit. What about it? Do you have one? I have Mom's. What? The one your mother bought me. Navy, for your cousin's wedding and then for, well, for her funeral. I didn't say that part. He knew. There was a pause on the line long enough that I heard him breathing. Dad, that's like 15 years old, 16. So, another pause. Victoria's mom is doing this whole thing where everything's coordinated and I think she's, look, would you let me buy you a new one? As a gift? I'll have it sent to Bozeman. You go get it fitted at that place on Main. Ethan, it's a gift, Dad. Son, what? Is it a gift or is it a costume? Silence. That's not fair, he said. Might not be. But it's the question. You know what? Forget it. I'm not trying to fight with you. You never are, he said. That's the thing. You never are. And somehow I always feel like I lost. And he hung up. I stood there in my kitchen with the phone in my hand for a long while. Then I went upstairs, and I got the Navy suit out of the closet, and I laid it on the bed, and I sat down next to it. There's a place inside the left breast pocket where the linings come loose about an inch. Margaret would have fixed it in 4 minutes. She'd have had it done before I finished making coffee. I didn't have it fixed. I wore it exactly the way she left it. I drove down to Jackson on the Thursday. The resort had a valet, kid maybe 20, who came around the front of my truck and then hesitated in a way I found genuinely funny. Are you checking in? I am under? Hayes. He looked at a tablet, looked at the truck, looked at me. Hayes, Walter Hayes? That's right. Yes, sir, you're okay. You're in the Teton wing. He was still looking at the truck. Ed, is it okay if I move it? It's a manual. Ed, leave it. Point me at a spot, and I'll put it there myself. Ed, I parked between a Range Rover and something Italian and low that I'd have needed help getting out of. Ed, Ethan found me in the lobby an hour later. He hugged me. Ed, a real one. You made it. I made it. Ed, Dad, about the phone call, water under. No, I want... Ed, Ethan. I put a hand on his shoulder. It's your wedding. Ed, water under. He nodded, genuinely tired, the kind that isn't about sleep. Ed, her family's a lot, he said. You mentioned, just if anybody says anything, don't take it personally, okay? They talk about money constantly. Ed, it's not about you, it's just how they are. All right. Ed, I mean it, it's not about you, he said that twice. Ed, it's not about you, which is what people say right before something is very much about you. Ed, the rehearsal dinner was Friday at 7. Ed, long table under a tent, with the mountains behind it, though I'm not going to describe the mountains to you because you've seen mountains. Ed, 41 people, place cards, mine was at the far end. Ed, I counted, 19 chairs between me and my son. Now here's where it starts. Ed, the trio was playing. People were doing that pre-dinner thing where everybody's standing and holding drinks and nobody's sitting because sitting first is somehow a defeat. Ed, and Victoria came through the crowd with her father in tow, introducing him around, and I could see her working her way down the table toward me. She got to the man on my left first, some college friend of Ethan's. Ed, Daddy, this is Marcus. He and Ethan roomed together at CU. Ed, Marcus is at Goldman now. Marcus Richard shook his hand warmly. Ed, which desk? They talked for 90 seconds, 90 full seconds. Ed, about a desk. Then she turned and she grabbed my wrist. Ed, Daddy, wait, before you sit down, this is Walter. Ed, Ethan's father, that laugh. He's a broke old dirt farmer from outside Bozeman. Ed, and I'm going to tell you what went through my head in that half second, because I've never told anybody, not even Ethan. Ed, I thought, Margaret, I'm glad you're not here. That's it. Ed, that's the whole thought. Not anger, not a comeback. Ed, just relief, of a bitter and terrible kind, that my wife did not have to stand in a tent in Wyoming and hear a 29-year-old girl reduce 41 years of our life together to a punchline about dirt. Ed, Richard shifted his glass, put out his hand. Well, Ed, nothing wrong with honest work. You want to know the second worst part? Ed, nobody corrected her. Not one person at that table, said Victoria. Ed, not her mother, not a bridesmaid, not my son. There were people at that table who knew. Ed, not the details, but Ethan's college roommate had been to my place. Ed, he'd shot sporting clays off my back 40 in 2011. Ed, he knew that little ranch was a hell of a thing to call it, and he stood there and looked at his shoes. Ed, because that's what happens. When the person with the most social power in a room makes a joke, the room's job is to let it land. Ed, even if it lands on a 67-year-old man in his dead wife's suit. Ed, I sat down. They served dinner, something with a foam on it. Ed, a woman across from me, Claire's sister, I think, leaned over and said, so do you get to travel much, or does the farm keep you tied down? Ed, ranch, sorry, it's a ranch, farms crops, oh, sorry. Ed, ranch and not much, that's a shame, she patted my arm. Ed, everybody should see Europe. Then Richard stood up and tapped his glass. Ed, he gave a toast. It was a good toast, I'll give him that he's a man who's given a lot of toast. Ed, he talked about watching Victoria grow up. He talked about Ethan being the kind of young man you want at the table when the numbers get hard. Ed, he got a laugh, he got another laugh, and then he said this. Ed, and I want to say something about family. Because a marriage isn't two people, it's two families deciding to become one. Ed, Claire and I have been blessed. We've built something we're proud of, and we're proud to open it up. He raised his glass. Ed, to the ones who built and the ones who will inherit. Ed, 40 people drank to that. 19 chairs down, my son drank to that. Ed, to the ones who built and the ones who will inherit. Ed, I sat there with a glass of water in my hand and I did not raise it. Ed, Ethan found me outside afterward near the fire pit. Ed, Dad, hey, look about what Vic said. What'd she say? Ed, he stopped. Don't do that. Do what? That thing where you make me say it out loud. Ed, seems like somebody ought to. He put his hands in his pockets. Ed, wouldn't look at me. She didn't mean it like that. Ed, how'd she mean it? It's a bit, Dad. She does it with everybody. Ed, it's affectionate. She called her uncle a wine alcoholic in front of his wife last Christmas. Everybody laughed. Ed, was he? Well then, Ethan exhaled hard. Ed, okay, that's fair, son. I waited until he looked at me. Ed, I don't care what she called me. You obviously do. Ed, no, listen to me. And my voice did something I didn't intend. It dropped. And it went rough. And I heard my father in it. Which happens about twice a decade. I don't care what she called me. I care that you heard it, and you turned toward the bar. He went white. That's when I watched you, Dad. Half a step. That's all it would have taken. Half a step and a hand on her arm and hey, easy. That's it. That's the whole thing. Any man in there could have done it. But the only one it counted from was you. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, if I correct her in front of her father, I hear about it for 3 days. I know, you don't. You really don't know what it's like. I know exactly what it's like, I said. I just made a different trade. He turned and walked back toward the tent. I went up to my room a little after 10, took off the navy suit. Hung it on the back of the door because Margaret always said, a suit thrown on a chair is a suit you don't respect. Then I sat on the edge of that hotel bed and took out my wallet, and out of the fold behind my license I pulled a piece of paper I'd been carrying for 8 weeks. It was a photocopy. Legal description, Gallatin County. 412 acres along the creek, the piece with the cottonwoods, where Margaret and I ate lunch off the tailgate the summer we were 31 and had no money and no idea if we'd make it. I'd had my attorney draw it up in June, a gift deed. Wedding present. Ethan and Victoria Hayes, joint tenants, with a note in my own handwriting that I'd rewritten 4 times and still wasn't happy with. I had it in my jacket pocket that whole dinner. I sat there in a hotel room in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, in my undershirt at 67 years old. And I read that legal description about 9 times without absorbing a word of it. Then I folded it back up and put it behind my license. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A voicemail, no ring, just the notification, the way it does when you've been out of service and it catches up all at once. I didn't listen to it that night. I turned off the lamp and I lay there in the dark with my hands on my chest, and I thought about the fact that in 17 hours my only child was going to marry into a family that had looked at my hands and decided that was the end of the sentence. And I thought about what Margaret used to say, the thing she said the day we closed on the Hollis parcel in '94, and I was worried we'd overreached. Waltz, she said, let 'em think what they think. The ground don't argue. It just sits there being worth what it's worth. I slept about 2 hours. At 6:40 in the morning I went down to the lobby for coffee, because a man doesn't stop getting up early just because his heart's sore. And that's where a man I had never met in my life walked up to my table. Set down his cup, and said, excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you. Are you Walter Hayes? Excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you. Are you Walter Hayes? I looked up from my coffee. It was 6:40 in the morning and the lobby was empty except for a girl restocking pastries and a man in a golf shirt standing at my table holding a cup of coffee like he was afraid to set it down. I am, I said. Andrew Miller. He put his hand out. I'm with Northbridge Agricultural Partners, out of Boise. I shook it. Walter, may I? It's a free chair. He sat. He set his coffee down and then he moved it 2 inches, which is what a man does when he's about to say something he's rehearsed. Mr. Hayes, I want to be respectful of the fact that you're at a wedding this weekend, and I am absolutely not trying to do business at a wedding. But, he laughed a little, but I've written you 11 letters. I sat back in my chair. 11. Since last August. Certified. 4 of them watched my face. You never opened them, did you? And here's the thing. I hadn't. I want to be honest with you the way I've tried to be honest all the way through this. There is a drawer in my kitchen. Second one down. Left of the sink. And it has 40 years of mail in it that I decided wasn't worth my mourning. Certified letters from Boise. Certified letters from Denver. Certified letters from a company in Sacramento with a picture of a wheat stalk on the envelope. After Margaret died, opening mail became a thing I did about once a season. And mostly what I opened were the ones with a hand address. Because those were the ones from people who actually knew her. I didn't open them, I said. Okay, he nodded slowly. Okay, that explains a great deal. Explains what? Explains why a man I've been told is impossible to reach was, apparently, just not reading his mail. I drank some coffee. What's in the letters, Mr. Miller? Andrew. He put both hands flat on the table. Mr. Hayes, do you know what your ground is worth? I know what I paid. That is not the same question. No, I said, it isn't. He looked at me for a second longer than was comfortable, and I watched him make a decision about how to talk to me. Ed, I've watched a lot of men make that decision. Most of them decide to talk slower. Ed, he decided to talk straight, and I liked him from that moment on, which I want on the record because of what happens later. Ed, there's a project, he said. It's been in assembly for about 3 years. Ed, roughly 19,000 acres in the south end of the Gallatin, aggregated out of 41 separate ownerships. Ed, irrigated row crop. Ed, seed potato. Ed, a processing facility. Ed, rail spur off the existing line. Ed, it is, without exaggeration, the largest agricultural development in the state in 30 years. Ed, I've heard rumors. Everybody's heard rumors. What nobody outside about 9 people knows is that the whole thing has been stalled since last spring. Ed, why? Because of you. I set the cup down. Say that again. Ed, your ground sits between the North Assembly and the water, he said. Ed, everything upstream of you is optioned. Everything downstream of you is optioned. Ed, the Hollis parcel, the Pruitt place, the 2 sections the Bellamy family sold in '09. Ed, all of it. Every single piece except 4,100 acres in the middle with one name on the deed. And that name is yours, and you have not answered a letter in 11 months. Ed, the girl at the pastry case dropped a tray. I remember that because both of us looked over and neither of us actually saw it. Ed, there's no way around me, I said. There's a way around you if you want to spend $60 million in 4 years in water court. Ed, I sat there for a while, he let me. Ed, that's another thing I liked about him. Andrew, I said finally, why are you at this hotel? Ed, he blinked. I'm a guest, he said, at the wedding. Ed, Collins Whitmore is one of our equity partners on the project. Ed, Richard and I have worked together for 2 years. He picked up his coffee. Ed, I flew in last night, missed the dinner, weather in Salt Lake. Ed, I want you to understand what happened inside my chest at that moment, because there was no expression on my face at all. Ed, Collins Whitmore, I said. Richard Collier of the bride, he smiled. Ed, good man, aggressive. But good, huh? You know him? Ed, and I sat there at 6:52 in the morning, with a cardboard cup of resort coffee in my hand, and I made a choice that I have thought about every single day since. Ed, we've met, I said. Small world, it's not that big a state. Ed, he laughed and he never knew. He genuinely never knew, not for another 11 hours. Ed, then he said the thing that changed the temperature of the whole weekend. Ed, look, he said, I'll be blunt with you because I don't have a lot of runway. Ed, Richard's group has an option payment due to the water district on September 30th. Ed, $9.2 million. Ed, if the parcel isn't under contract by then, Ed, the option lapses. Ed, the water rights revert. Ed, and 3 years of assembly comes apart like a wet newspaper. Ed, he turned his cup a quarter turn. Ed, there are people in Denver who have their entire balance sheet standing on your fence line, Mr. Ed Hayes, and I don't think you knew that. No, I said. Ed, I didn't. Well, he stood up, he put a card on the table and slid it toward me with 2 fingers. Ed, now you do. He was almost gone when I said Andrew. Ed, he turned. 11 letters, I said. You wrote them yourself? Ed, everyone. Then I owe you an apology. He shook his head. Ed, you don't owe me anything. That's kind of the problem for everybody else. Ed, and then Claire Collins came around the corner. She was in a robe and slippers, and she had a phone against her ear and a clipboard under her arm at 7 in the morning, and she saw the 2 of us, and her whole face changed shape. Ed, Andrew, you made it, Claire. She lowered the phone. Ed, oh good Lord, don't let Walter corner you before you've had breakfast. Ed, I have been told my face doesn't do much. Margaret used to say I had 2 expressions, listening and about to listen. Ed, so nobody in that lobby saw anything at all. Andrew said, sorry. Ed, Walter. She said my name the way you'd introduce a dog that had gotten into the room. Ed, he's Ethan's father. He's the one I told you about. Ed, runs a little place up by Bozeman. She put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed it. Ed, Walter, honey. Ed, Andrew is very important to Richard's business. Ed, so let's let him have his coffee. Ed, nobody spoke for about 2 seconds. Andrew Miller looked at me. Ed, I watched his eyes go from my face to my hands to my boots. The same route Richards had gone. Ed, and then all the way back up to my face. Ed, and something arrived behind them that I can only describe as a door opening in a dark house. Ed, Ethan's father, he said. That's right, I said. Ed, Walter Hayes. That's right. Claire said, have you 2 been introduced? Andrew, he's actually very interesting. He's got horses. Ed, I'm aware, Andrew said. You're aware he's got horses? Ed, I'm aware, Andrew said, of Mr. Hayes. And then he did something I did not expect and have never forgotten. He put his coffee down on the table. And he put out his hand a second time. And he said, "Sir." It was a genuine pleasure. You have my card. Please call me whenever it suits you. Whenever weekends, 2 in the morning, it suits me. Claire's mouth opened slightly. He walked away. She stood there holding her clipboard. Well, she said, that was odd, was it? He's usually so warm. She patted my arm. Anyway, are you going to shave, ma'am? For the photos. I only ask because the photographer does this whole thing with light and it reads better. She was already looking at her clipboard. 9:30, boys are in the Cody suite. Don't be late, Walter. You're the only one I have to chase. She left. I sat back down. My hands were flat on the table and I noticed they were shaking, and I want to be clear that it was not anger. I don't get angry the way people expect. What I had was something closer to vertigo, the feeling you get when you're walking downstairs in the dark and there's one fewer step than you thought. Because I finally understood the shape of the weekend I was in. I finished the coffee. Then I picked up my phone and I saw the voicemail I hadn't listened to the night before. It was from Dale Rooney. Dale's been my attorney since 1988. He is 71 years old. He has a voice like a gravel road, and he does not call people on a Friday night. I stood up and walked outside to the parking lot to listen to it, because I already knew I didn't want a lobby around me when I did. Walt Dale, call me back tonight if you get this, and I mean tonight, pause. Sound of a chair. I got a call from Cheryl at Galton Title. Somebody's been running title on Hayes Valley, not once. 6 times since February. Full chain. Easements, mineral. The whole works. That is not a curious neighbor, Walt. That is somebody building a file. Another pause longer. And the requesting party on the last 3 is an LLC out of Denver. Cottonwood Ridge Holdings. He cleared his throat. Walt, call me. There's something on the manager list I'd rather say to you out loud. The message ended. I stood in a parking lot in Jackson Hole, Wyoming at 7:20 in the morning. On the day my only son was getting married. And I listened to it a second time. Then a third. Something on the manager list I'd rather say to you out loud. I called him. It went to his machine because Dale Rooney is 71 and he does not carry a phone into a fishing boat, and it was 7:20 on a Saturday in July. I left a message. Then I went upstairs and shaved, because that woman had asked me to, and I have never been able to be small in return. At 8:15, Ethan knocked on my door. He had a garment bag over his shoulder and 2 coffees, and he looked like a man who had slept the way I had. Can I come in? It's your money paying for it. It's actually Richard's money paying for it, he said, and then he closed his eyes. That came out worse than I meant. It came out about right. He set the coffees down. Neither of us drank them. About last night, he said. You already did last night. I did it badly. He sat down on the corner of the bed, which is a thing he's done since he was 11 years old, and has never once known he does. I've been up since 4, so have I. Dad, I'm not going to stand here and tell you she was right. Good, but I need to get through today, that's all. I need to get through today, and then Vic and I go to Kauai for 9 days, and then I'll deal with it. All of it, I promise you. Deal with it, I said. Yes, son. You can't deal with a thing after you've already let it go through. That's not dealing. That's cleanup. He looked at the carpet. Can I ask you something? I said. Yeah. What exactly do you do for work now? His head came up. Faster than the question deserved. What? Simple question. 6 years I've been getting the same 4 words out of you. Commercial portfolio something. What is it you actually do? Where is this coming from? It's coming from a man who's about to watch his son get married and realized he couldn't answer the question if somebody asked him at the bar. He stood up. He walked to the window and stood with his back to me. I'm at Halverson Reed, he said. You know that. I know that's where you were. Silence, 4 seconds. I counted them. I left in March, he said. You left in March. Yes, and you've told me about that when. I'm telling you now. You're telling me because I asked. He turned around and his face was doing something I hadn't seen since he was 17, and I found the beer cans behind the equipment shed. It's a good move, Dad. It's a great move. It's a real seat. It's not analyst work. It's origination. And I did not tell you because every single time I try to tell you something about my career, you get this look on your face, like I've told you I joined a cult. What's the firm? Does it matter? Ethan, what's the firm? He didn't answer. And I want to say something here, Because this is the part where I could have kept pushing and I did not, and I've had a long time to think about why. Ed, it was 8:30 in the morning. He was getting married at 2. Ed, he was standing in a hotel room with his mother's face on him. Ed, and I had a piece of paper in my wallet with 412 acres of cottonwood bottom on it that I had planned to hand him at the reception. Ed, and there was some part of me. Ed, some old and stubborn and hoping part that thought, not today. Ed, ask him Monday. Let the boy have his wedding. So I said, all right. Ed, he blinked. All right, go get married. Ed, he looked at me like a man who'd braced for a punch that never landed, and now didn't know what to do with his shoulders. Ed, Dad, go on. Ed, thank you, he said. Ed, and he hugged me. Ed, and he held it about a second and a half longer than usual. Ed, and I felt him breathe out. Ed, he got to the door and I said, Ethan. Yeah? Whatever you're standing in, I said, you can get out of it. Ed, there's not a thing on this earth you can do that would make me not help you get out of it. Ed, you understand me? He stood in that doorway for a long moment. Ed, yeah, he said, and his voice cracked in the middle of it. Ed, then he left. At 9:40, the photographer took the family photos in a room they'd set up on the second floor. Ed, I want to keep this short because it is the smallest thing in this entire story, and it is also the one I still feel in my sternum. Ed, they did the bride's side first, 22 people. Ed, grandmother in a chair, cousins in a wedge, Richard Center left with his hand on Victoria's shoulder. Ed, then they did the couple. Ed, then the photographer. Ed, a nice young woman with tattoos up one arm said, okay. Ed, and now groom's immediate family. Ed, and I stepped forward. Ed, and Claire Collins said, oh, Walter, hang on. Ed, I stopped. She said to the photographer, it's just him. Ed, so it's just going to be the two of them, and it's going to look a little thin next to ours. And I think what we said was we'd fold him into the large group, remember? For balance. The photographer looked at her, then at me. Ma'am, it's the groom's father. Ed, I know that. It's a standard shot. Right, and I'm saying for the album, compositionally. Ed, Ethan said Mom. He called her Mom. He'd been calling her Mom for 4 months, and I had never once heard it out loud until that second. Claire, he's in the shot. She smiled. Of course he's in the shot. Ed, I'm talking about the album. He's in the shot. Fine. So they took it, me and my son, 2 men standing on a piece of taped floor. Ed, the photographer said, sir, can you turn in a little toward him? And I did. And my son put his hand on my back. And she took 4 frames, and I have one of them framed on the bookshelf in my living room to this day. Ed, here's the part I didn't know until 3 weeks later. Ed, she sent me all 4. Ed, she sent them to my house, printed, Ed, in a hard envelope, Ed, with a note that said, Mr. Ed, Hayes, these weren't in the client package. I thought you should have them anyway. Ed, all the best, Danielle. A 26-year-old girl with tattoos on her arm was the only person in that building who did a decent thing for me before she knew a single fact about my life. Ed, I have never forgotten that either. At 11:15, I got Dale Rooney on the phone. Ed, I was standing behind the resort near the loading dock, which is where the maintenance men smoke, and where I have generally found the most honest air at any hotel I've ever been in. Ed, Walt, Dale, you alone? I'm behind a dumpster in Wyoming. Ed, good enough. I heard him shuffle paper. Cottonwood Ridge Holdings, LLC. Ed, registered in Colorado, February 11th. Registered agent's a service company, which means nothing. Ed, sole member is a second entity, which means somebody paid a lawyer to make it boring on purpose. Ed, and Colorado makes you list managers. Paper. Ed, there's 2, Richard A. Collins. Yeah. And Ed, Hayes. I put my hand on the wall. There's a thing that happens where you hear a sentence and your body understands it about a second and a half before your mind agrees to. Ed, my legs knew first. My legs went loose and I put my hand flat against the wall of that loading dock and held it there. Ed, Walt, I'm here. You want me to say it again? Ed, no. Ed, now hold on before you drive off a cliff. Ed, Dale said. Ed, and his voice got sharper. Ed, which is his version of kindness. Ed, manager doesn't mean owner. Manager means signature authority. Ed, a kid comes over from another firm. They put him on the LLC because he's the one doing the work. Ed, that's normal. That is completely normal. 6 title searches, Dale. Ed, I know. On his mother's ground. I know, Walt. Ed, I stood there breathing. There's more, he said. Go. Ed, Cheryl says the last pull, the one on July 2nd, included a request for the mineral reservation and the ditch easement out of the 87 purchase. Pause. Ed, Walt, nobody pulls a 1987 ditch easement out of curiosity. Ed, somebody's looking for a defect, a crack. Something to argue you don't hold what you think you hold. He let that sit. Or something to make you nervous enough to sell cheap. The maintenance man 10 feet away lit a cigarette and offered me one. I shook my head. He nodded and looked away, and I have thought since that he was the second decent stranger of the day. Dale, I said, say I did nothing. Nothing. Say I go to this wedding and I smile and I shake hands and I go home and I open my mail like a grown man on Monday morning. Then Monday morning you'd have about 6 weeks of leverage that these people don't know you have, Dale said. And Walt, I've been your lawyer 38 years. You've never once used leverage in your life. No. So what are you going to do? And I looked out at the mountains I wasn't going to describe, and I said, I'm going to go watch my son get married. At 2 o'clock I watch my son get married. I'm not going to spend much on it because you don't need me to. He cried. He was not expecting to, and he did. Right at the start. Right when the doors opened. And he wiped his face with the back of his hand exactly like his mother used to. And 180 people made that sound a crowd makes when it decides to love somebody. Victoria was beautiful. I'm not going to take that from her. The vows. Hers were funny. His were not. His were 4 sentences, and the 4th one was, you're my whole family now. And I sat in the second row in a 16-year-old Navy suit and I felt something in my chest close like a hand. You're my whole family now. He didn't mean it the way it hit me. I know that. Boys say things at altars. But I sat there and I thought about a drawer full of unopened letters and an LLC registered in February and a photograph they hadn't wanted to take. And I thought, he doesn't know what he's saying. And that's the whole problem. Nobody in this building knows what they're saying. They're all just saying it. At 6:15 the reception started. At 6:40 I found the memory table. They'd set it up by the entrance to the ballroom, one of those tables with framed photographs of people who've passed. Victoria's grandfather in an army uniform, Claire's mother. A cousin who died young, 20-something in a baseball cap. 9 frames. Margaret was not one of them. I stood there and I counted them twice, which is a thing you do when you have already understood and are looking for a way out of understanding. Claire came by with a glass in her hand. Isn't it lovely? Where's Margaret? I said. Sorry, my wife, Ethan's mother. She looked at the table. Her face did something quick and small, and then it recovered, and that recovery is the thing I'll take to my grave. Oh, she said. Walter, the photo you sent wasn't high resolution. It was a photograph. It was a photograph, right? Of a photograph. And when the designer blew it up, it got that grainy thing. She waved her hand. And honestly, the frames were all a set. It was very curated, and one that didn't match would have thrown the whole. You understand, you could have called me. For a picture? You called me 4 times about the shuttle schedule. She laughed. She actually laughed, and it was not cruel, and that is somehow so much worse. Walter, you are being sensitive. It's an emotional day. Her son got married today, I said. She had 14 months of chemotherapy, and she planned this in her head from the time he was 6 years old, and she is not on the table. Claire's smile faded a little at the edges. I'll see if we can find a frame, she said. Don't, Walter. Don't, I said. Don't go find a frame at 8 o'clock at night because I made you uncomfortable. That's worse. That's worse than the whole thing. She looked at me for a second with something that was almost recognition. Almost. Then someone called her name from across the room and she said, we'll talk about it, and she went. I stood in front of 9 strangers in 9 matching frames. At 8:40, Richard Collins found me. He had a bourbon in his hand and about 3 in him, and he put an arm across my shoulders like we'd been in the service together. Walter Hayes, Richard, sit with me a minute. We sat at an empty table with somebody's abandoned dessert plates on it. I want to say something, he said, and I want to say it man to man. All right, I like you, okay. No, listen to me. I've been around a lot of guys who've got a lot of things, and I'm telling you, you have a quality. He tapped the table twice. You're not impressed. You know how rare that is? Everybody at this wedding is impressed. You're the only man in this room who isn't impressed. I'm impressed by the shrimp. He laughed too loud. See? That's what I mean, he drank. Then his voice dropped into something more sober and much worse. Walter, can I be straight with you? I'd prefer it. I worry about you, do you? I do. 67 years old out there by yourself doing that work. That's a young man's work. He leaned in. Victoria says you don't even have anybody living on the place. Ed, I've got two hands come in seasonal. Right, but at night. Ed, at night I sleep. What if you go down, Walter? He said it gently, which made it obscene. Ed, what if you go down out there and nobody finds you for 3 days? Ed, I looked at my hands. Here's what I want to do, he said. Ed, and this is not charity, this is family. Let me have my guys look at your place. Ed, no obligation. Ed, we'll figure out what it's worth. Ed, we'll get you a real number. Ed, and you take that number and you get yourself a nice little place in town. Ed, close to the hospital. Ed, close to a decent restaurant. Ed, let somebody else fix the fence. I said nothing. You know what I'd guess, he said. Ed, just off the top of my head, for a working operator with the buildings, I'd say you're sitting on 1.5. Ed, maybe 1.8 if you got the right buyer at the right time of year. Ed, million. He said $1.8 million to a man whose ground had been appraised 1 week earlier at a number I had not shared with a living soul. Ed, that's a lot of money, I said. It's life-changing money for a guy like you. He put his hand on my forearm. Ed, and Walter, Ed, I'm going to be honest. Ed, if we did it inside the family, Ed, you wouldn't even lose a commission. Ed, I looked at his hand on my arm. Richard, I said, can I ask you something? Anything. Does Ethan work for you? Ed, his hand came off my arm. Not fast. Slow, the way you take your hand off a stove when you're pretending you didn't feel it. Ed, where'd you hear that, he said. And that right there was my answer. Ed, before I could open my mouth, a voice behind us said Richard. There you are, Andrew Miller. Suit and no tie, phone in his hand. Ed, Andy. Sorry to break in. He looked down at me and his whole face changed. Ed, Mr. Hayes. Richard said, you've met? We had coffee this morning, Andrew said. Ed, Richard laughed. God, Andy, I hope he didn't talk your ear off about hay prices. Ed, and Andrew Miller looked at Richard Collins for about 2 full seconds, which at a wedding reception is a very long time. Ed, Richard, he said, do you know who this man is? Ed, the music was loud. Somebody was calling for the couple on the dance floor. Ed, Richard was still half smiling with his glass at his chest. Ed, what do you know, Andrew said, who this man is? Ed, and then Victoria's voice came over the microphone saying it was time for the father-daughter dance. Ed, and the room stood up. Ed, and the moment broke apart in 100 pieces. Ed, and Richard Collins set his glass down and said, Ed, hold that thought. Ed, gentlemen. Ed, and walked away. Ed, Andrew stayed standing there. You didn't tell him, he said. Ed, no, Mr. Hayes. He crouched down beside my chair so we were level. Ed, why not? Because I wanted to know what he'd say when he thought I was nobody, I said. Ed, and now I do. I went up to my room at 11:20. Ed, I took off the Navy suit and I hung it on the back of the door. Ed, at 11:41 my phone buzzed. It was Dale. Ed, a photograph of a document, gray and crooked, taken with a 71-year-old man's thumb halfway across the corner. Ed, Colorado Secretary of State, Statement of Authority, Cottonwood Ridge Holdings, LLC, 2 names in the manager block. Ed, and under my son's name. Ed, on the signature line. Ed, in handwriting I have known since it was learning to make a capital E. Ed, the date. Ed, February 11th, 3 weeks before he called to tell me he was engaged. Ed, I was still looking at it when somebody knocked on my door. Ed, Dad, Ethan, are you up? I need to talk to you. Dad, are you up? I need to talk to you. I put the phone face down on the nightstand. Ed, screen against the wood. I remember doing that very deliberately, the way you'd cover something on a table before company comes in. Ed, then I opened the door. He still had the tuxedo pants on and the shirt untucked and the tie gone, and his eyes were red in a way that had nothing to do with drinking. Ed, I could smell that he'd had a few, but he wasn't drunk. Ed, Ethan's never been a drunk. He's the other thing, the one where a man gets very, very careful with his words. Can I come in? It's 11:40 at night on your wedding day. Ed, I know. Where's your wife? He flinched at the word. Ed, a hair, asleep. It was a long day. Come in. Ed, he came in and stood in the middle of the room with his hands hanging at his sides, and then he sat down on the corner of the bed. Ed, same corner. Same spot he'd sat that morning. Same spot he'd sat when he was 11 and had to tell me he'd wrecked the four-wheeler. Ed, I said. I don't know how to start. You already started. Ed, you knocked. He laughed, one breath out of his nose. No humor in it at all. Ed, I've been standing in that hallway for about 20 minutes, he said. Ed, I know, I heard you. His head came up. You heard me? Ed, floor creaks by the ice machine. He rubbed his face with both hands. Ed, God. I pulled the chair out from the desk and sat down in it, facing him. Ed, I did not sit next to him on the bed, and that was a decision, and he noticed it. Ed, Dad, I have to ask you something, and I need you to let me get all the way through it before you say anything. Ed, all right, promise me. I'm not going to promise you anything, son. Ed, talk. He nodded like that was fair. Then he started, and I'm going to give it to you the way he said it, because the shape of how a man says a thing tells you more than the thing. There's a project, he said, in the valley, ag development. Ed, it's been assembling for about 3 years, and Ed, honestly, Ed, it's the biggest thing anybody's done in Montana in a generation. Ed, and it's good, Dad. Ed, it's not condos, it's not a resort, it's row crop and a processing plant and about 400 permanent jobs in a county that hasn't added 400 jobs since the 70s. Ed, and there's a piece of ground that's holding it up. Ed, he stopped there, waiting for me. I let it sit. I let it sit long enough that it got loud. Ed, go on, I said, it's yours, yeah. His head snapped up. Ed, you know, I found out this morning at 6:40 in the lobby from a man named Andrew Miller, who has written me 11 letters I never opened. Ed, Ethan closed his eyes. Andy talked to you. Andy talked to me. Ed, what did he say? And there it is, that question. Ed, what did he say? Not, are you all right? Not, I'm sorry, you found out from a stranger. Ed, what did he say? Which means how much do I have to admit to? Ed, he said there's people in Denver with their balance sheets standing on my fence line, I said. Ed, that about cover it? Ethan put his elbows on his knees and looked at the carpet. Ed, that covers it, he said. At 11:52, my son asked me for 4,000 acres. Ed, he didn't say it that way. Nobody ever says it that way. Ed, I'm not asking you to sell, he said. I want to be really clear about that. Ed, I'm asking you to take a meeting, that's all. Ed, one meeting. Ed, with Andy and with a guy named Pruitt from the Water District. Ed, and you sit there and you listen. Ed, and if you say no at the end of it, Ed, I will never bring it up again as long as I live. Ed, when? Whenever you want. When do they need it? Ed, he hesitated. That hesitation cost him more than anything else he said that night. Ed, there's an option payment, he said, September 30th. 9.2 million. His whole body went still. Ed, how do you know that number? Because a man told it to me over a paper cup of coffee 18 hours ago, while your mother-in-law was telling him not to let me corner him. Ed, Ethan, my voice came out flat and low, and I did not rasp not the entire night, and I think that's what scared him. Ed, how long have you been carrying this around? What? Ed, you heard me. He looked at the carpet again. A while, he said. Ed, how long is a while, Dad? How long? Since last summer, he said. Ed, last summer, August. The month I drove 9 hours to a house in Cherry Hills and had a man ask me about acreage over the bread plate. Ed, I sat back in that chair. Say that again, I said. Ed, since last August. So, when I drove down to Denver and sat at that table and your father-in-law asked me how many deeded acres I ran, and I told him 3,000 and change, and he put his butter knife down. Ed, that was not a man making conversation. No, Ethan said. Ed, that was a man confirming a number. Yes, I sat there. Ed, you want to know what I felt? I'll tell you, and it isn't what people expect. Ed, I did not feel betrayed. Betrayal is a hot thing and it moves fast. Ed, what I felt was the floor of my life tilting about 4 degrees, and every memory of the last 11 months sliding a little to the left. Ed, the dinner, the photo albums, Victoria asking me on that couch if I was okay with all this because she wanted us to be close. Ed, the horse show pictures, I said. What? Your mother-in-law brought out photo albums after dessert and sat me down for 40 minutes. Ed, that's just what she does, is it? Ethan stood up. Ed, okay, no, we're not doing this. She brought out photo albums because she's a mother and she likes photo albums, not because there's a conspiracy. Ed, I didn't say conspiracy. You're implying I'm asking questions, son, and you're answering the ones I haven't asked yet. Ed, you might think about why. He stopped with his mouth open. Ed, then he sat back down. At 12:20 in the morning, I asked him the one that mattered. Ed, what's Cottonwood Ridge Holdings? I have replayed the next 4 seconds 10,000 times. Ed, his face did not do surprise. That's the thing. If he'd done surprise, I'd have had hope. Ed, what his face did was go completely, perfectly blank, the way a man's does when the thing he's been dreading finally arrives and some small part of him is relieved. Ed, where did you get that name? He said. Dale Rooney. Ed, Dale, 38 years my attorney. He got a call from Cheryl at Gallatin Title. Ed, somebody's run full title on Hayes Valley 6 times since February. Ed, chain easements mineral. Ed, the works. Ed, last 3 pulls, the requesting party is an LLC out of Denver. Ed, Colorado makes you list your managers, Ethan. Ed, he stopped breathing. I watched it happen. There's 2 names on it, I said. Ed, you want to say them, or you want me to? He didn't say anything. Ed, Richard A. Collins, I said, and Ethan W. Hayes. Ed, it's not February 11th, Dad. You called me in April to say you'd asked her to marry you. My voice cracked on the word April, and I hated it. Ed, you signed your name to a company that had already pulled title on your mother's ground 3 weeks before that phone call. Ed, he put both hands over his face, and here's where it got bad because he didn't deny it. Ed, he did something worse. He started explaining. It's a manager designation, he said from behind his hands. Ed, it's signature authority for the entity. It's not ownership. Ed, I don't own any of it. I don't have a nickel in it. Ed, title searches. That's standard diligence. Ed, standard diligence on a piece of ground that is not for sale, Ethan. Ed, it's not, Dad. Listen to me, listen. He dropped his hands and he was crying, and I want you to understand, my son does not cry. Twice in his adult life, his mother's funeral and this. Ed, I did it to protect you. Protect me, yes. Explain that to me. Ed, because if I'm not in the room, you're just a name on a plat map. He was up on his feet. Ed, do you have any idea how they talk about landowners in that room? Do you? They don't say Mr. Ed Hayes. They say the holdout. They say the legacy owner. Ed, they put you on a slide with a color code, Dad. Ed, and if you're red, you get a phone call from a guy whose whole job is to grind you. Ed, and I sat in that room and I said, no. Ed, I'll handle it. Ed, that's my father. Ed, I'll handle it. Ed, and they let me, because I was in the room. And what did you tell them you'd handle? Ethan, what did you tell them you would handle? Ed, that the family relationship gave us a path, he said. Ed, say it in English, that I could get you to the table. Ed, there it was. I sat in a hotel chair in Jackson Hole and I looked at my only child and I said the most honest sentence I have ever said out loud. Ed, you made a promise about me to people who pay you. Ed, to people, I said, who pay you. Ed, he sat down on that bed and he sobbed, twice, big ugly ones, the kind that come up out of a man sideways. Ed, then he got it under control the way he always has, by force which he did not get from his mother. They recruited you for it, I said, no, March. Ed, you left Halverson Reed in March. You went to Richard's firm. Ed, I went because it's a better seat. You went in March. Ed, you signed the LLC in February. He stopped. You signed for a company you didn't work for yet, I said. Ed, and I watched, Ed, right there, Ed, at 12:35 in the morning on the first day of his marriage. Ed, I watched my son do the math for the first time. Ed, I watched it land. His mouth came open a little, and his eyes went somewhere past my shoulder, and I saw a 34-year-old man understand that he had been the asset, not the analyst. Ed, he said, yeah, I need you to not say the next part. Ed, I'm not going to say it because I can hear it. Ed, I know you can. He sat there with his hands hanging between his knees. Ed, she didn't know, he said, Vic. She didn't know about any of it, not the details. Ed, she thought she thinks you're a rancher who's tight with money. Ed, that's all she thinks. That's not better, son, I know. Ed, you understand that's not better? I know it's not better. He wiped his face with the heel of his hand, exactly like his mother, and it went through me like a nail. Ed, I know, I've known since about 10 seconds after she said it at that dinner. Ed, I have been sick about it for 26 hours. You didn't move. Ed, I know, half a step, I know, Dad, say it back to me. Ed, he looked up. What? Say the words, she said, out loud. Ed, I want to hear if you can. He stared at me. Say them. Ed, don't do this. Say them, Ethan. And my son opened his mouth and got about 2 syllables and broke old and stopped and could not finish it. Ed could not physically finish the sentence. That's right, I said quietly. Ed, you can't. So don't tell me it was a bit. At 12:50, he asked me the question I'd been waiting for since the lobby. Ed, Dad, what's it actually worth? And I want to be fair to him here, because I've had a year to be unfair and I'm tired of it. Ed, he didn't ask it greedy. He asked it the way a man asks how bad the X-ray is. Ed, why? Because Richard told me 1.6, he said. Ed, he told me that in October. Ed, he sat me down and he said, Ethan, Ed, your dad's got maybe 1.6 in dirt up there. Ed, and at his age, Ed, honest to God, Ed, the kindest thing you can do is help him get liquid. Ed, he told me 1.8 tonight. He talked to you about it tonight? Ed, at a table with somebody's cheesecake on it. Ethan put his hand over his mouth. Ed, at my wedding, at your wedding, Jesus, Ethan. Ed, what? Ask me again. He looked at me and he was scared. Ed, that's the part I'll carry. My son was scared to ask his father a number. Ed, what's it worth? He said. Ed, with the water rights, I said. Ed, and the ditch priority out of 1894. Ed, which nobody in that building has bothered to look up. Ed, and the 4,100 deeded acres that they need and cannot go around without spending $60 million and 4 years in court. Yeah, an outfit out of Sacramento offered me $31 million in January, I said. I didn't open the envelope until 3 weeks ago. He didn't move, he didn't blink. Say it again, he whispered. 31 million. Ethan Hayes sat on the corner of a hotel bed and laughed. Not a good laugh. The kind that's about half an inch from something much worse. He told me 1.6, he said. He did. He sat at his own kitchen island and looked me in the face and told me 1.6. And you believed him. Why wouldn't I believe him? He does this for a living, Dad. He's been doing this for 30 years. And I've been in Agland for 4 months. He stopped. He heard himself. Oh my God, yeah, he hired me in March. Yeah, he put me on the entity in February, and he hired me in March, and he told me the number in October. He was talking to the wall now, not to me. He told me the number first. He told me the number before he ever offered me the job. That's right. So that when I heard a real number later, I'd think it was a windfall. That's right. My son turned and looked at me, and there was nothing left in his face at all. Dad, what did I do? At 1:10 in the morning, I made the worst decision of the whole affair. He asked me, and this is the part where people who hear this story usually take his side, and I don't blame them. He asked me to come to the meeting. Not for them, he said. For me. Just come. Just sit in the room and let them see you, because right now every one of those men has a picture in their head of you, and it is wrong, and the second you walk in it breaks. And then what? And then you say whatever you want. No, say 31. Say nothing, I don't care. You don't care, I don't. Ethan, if I walk into that room and say 31, what happens to you? He didn't answer. Say it, it's fine. What happens to you? I'm on the entity, Dad. He said it very evenly. If the deal comes apart, I'm the manager who told a room full of investors he had a path. So I'm done, not just there, in Denver, in the whole business. I looked at my son, and I want to tell you what I felt, because it wasn't clean. Some of it was love. And some of it was the oldest, meanest satisfaction a man can have. Which is the feeling of being needed by somebody who forgot you existed. Both of those were in me at the same time, and I am not proud of the second one. So you didn't come here at midnight to apologize, I said. That's not fair. You came here because there's a payment due September 30th. That is not fair. Then tell me you'd have knocked on this door tonight if there was no land. He opened his mouth, and he couldn't do it. That silence went on for about 6 seconds. I've timed it since. On a clock. Sitting in my kitchen. Just to see how long 6 seconds is. It's a long time. Get out, I said. Dad, go be with your wife. It's your wedding night, Dad. Please, Ethan. I stood up. I have one thing left in this world that I know is true, and it's that you were a good boy who grew into a decent man, and if you stay in this room another 5 minutes, you and I are both going to find out whether that's still accurate. So go. He went to the door. He stopped with his hand on it. I love you, he said. That part's not strategy. I know it isn't, I said. That's what makes it so bad. He left. At 1:20, I took my wallet off the nightstand and I pulled out that photocopy. 412 acres of cottonwood bottom along the creek. Gift deed. Joint tenants. Ethan and Victoria Hayes. I read it one more time, then I tore it in half. Then I sat there holding 2 halves of a piece of paper and understood that tearing a photocopy accomplishes exactly nothing, because the original was in a fireproof box in Dale Rooney's office in Bozeman. And all I had actually done was throw a tantrum by myself in a rented room at 67 years old. I put both halves in the trash can. Then, about a minute later, I took them out again and put them in my jacket pocket, and I couldn't have told you why, and I still can't. At 4:50 in the morning, I put the Navy suit in my bag and I carried it down to the truck myself. There was nobody at the Valley stand. There was a kid at the front desk who said, "Sir, checkout's at 11. And I said, "I'm aware, And he said, "Do you need help with the bag?" And I said, "No, son. But thank you for asking." And I meant it. I drove out of Jackson at 5:10 in the morning. 5.5 hours to Bozeman. I did it in 6 because I stopped in Idaho Falls and sat in a diner and didn't eat anything. The waitress was maybe 60. She topped me off twice, and then the third time she just stood there with the pot. "You want to talk about it?" "No, ma'am. Wedding or funeral?" I looked up at her. "How'd you know?" "Honey," she said, "it's 5:40 in the morning and you're in a good shirt." I laughed. "First time in 2 days, wedding," I said. "Yours, my boys," she poured. "They're the worst kind. she said, Ed, and she walked off. And I sat there with about $4 of coffee in me and thought that a stranger in a diner in Idaho Falls had shown me more understanding in 9 seconds than 180 people in a ballroom. Ed, I got home at 11:20 in the morning on Sunday. Ed, I want to tell you I fell apart. I didn't. I fed the horses. Ed, I checked the tank in the north pasture because the float sticks in July. Ed, I ate a sandwich standing up over the sink, and I went out and fixed 40 feet of wire that had been bothering me since June. Ed, at 4 in the afternoon, I opened the drawer, second one down, left of the sink. Ed, 40 years of mail. I sat at the kitchen table where my son used to do long division, and I opened every single envelope in that drawer, and it took me until 9 at night. Ed, 11 letters from Andrew Miller at Northbridge, and I'll say this, they got progressively more human. Ed, the first one was a form. The fifth one had a handwritten line at the bottom. Ed, the 11th one, Ed, from June said, Ed, Mr. Hayes, Ed, I don't know if these are reaching you. Ed, if you'd rather never hear from me again, I'll respect that, but I'd ask you not to let anyone else make this decision for you. Ed, the Sacramento offer. Ed, 31 million cash. Ed, 90-day close expired. Ed, 2 letters from a firm in Denver I'd never heard of. Ed, and then at the bottom of the drawer, Ed, an envelope with a Gallatin County return address that I had not opened. Ed, postmarked May 22nd. Ed, notice of recorded instrument. I sat there and read it 3 times. Ed, on May 19th, Ed, an affidavit of interest had been recorded against Hayes Valley Ranch. Ed, parcels 7 through 11. Ed, by Cottonwood Ridge Holdings, LLC. Ed, a cloud on my title. Filed in the county courthouse where my wife and I got our marriage license. Ed, it doesn't mean they own anything. Ed, it means anybody who runs title from that day forward sees a company claiming there's a deal. Ed, and no bank. Ed, no buyer. Ed, no title company on God's green earth will touch it until it's cleared. Ed, somebody had put a fence around my ground while I wasn't reading my mail. Ed, I called Dale at 10 at night on a Sunday, Walt. They filed on me. What affidavit of interest? Ed, May 19th. Parcel 7 through 11. I heard him get out of a chair. Ed, read me the recording number. I read it to him. Son of a bitch, he said. Ed, that legal? It's not illegal. It's the kind of thing a certain kind of lawyer does when he's got a client who's scared. Paper. Ed, keys. Ed, he'd gone to his computer. Ed, at 10 o'clock. Ed, on a Sunday. Ed, at 71 years old. Ed, Walt, this is what the 6 title pulls were for. They weren't hunting a defect. Ed, they were building the affidavit, meaning somebody prepared a document alleging an existing agreement or understanding with the owner. He stopped. Ed, yeah, an affidavit's got to be sworn, so? Ed, so somebody signed it. Silence on that line for about 4 seconds. Ed, get me a copy, I said. Cher'll have it to me by 9. Ed, Dale, if it's his name on it, long pause. Ed, then we'll talk about it Monday, Dale said, which is what a man says when he's known you 38 years and doesn't want to be the one who says the true thing at 10 at night. Ed, at 9:40 Monday morning, my phone rang. Not Dale. Ed, Mr. Hayes, Andrew Miller. Andrew. Sir, I'm going to say something and then I'm going to hang up because if I stay on this call, I'm going to be a problem for myself. His voice was tight. Ed, I got back to Boise last night and I pulled the file. Ed, the offering memorandum for the North Assembly, 53 investors. Ed, okay, there's a page in it called parcel status. Ed, every ownership is color-coded. He took a breath. Ed, yours is green. What's green mean? Green means secured or effectively secured. Ed, I sat down on the porch step. Since when? Since the November amendment, he said. Ed, it changed from amber to green in November. And there's a footnote, and Mr. Ed, Hayes, I want you to hear this from me and not from a lawyer. Ed, read it. Family relationship confirmed. Owner cooperation represented by principal. Ed, which principal? There's an initial, he said. It's EH. Ed, I sat on my own porch. Ed, on my own ground. Ed, in the middle of the morning. Ed, and I could hear the horses over by the loafing shed. Ed, and I said, Andrew. Ed, sir, 53 investors put money into a deal because my son told them he could deliver his father. Ed, yes, sir, Andrew Miller said. That's what the document says. Ed, I hung up, and I sat there for about 20 minutes, and then Dale called, and I answered it on the first ring. Ed, you got it? I got it, Walt. Whose name's on the affidavit? Ed, he didn't answer. Dale, whose name is sworn on that affidavit? Ed, Walt, he said. Ed, I've got the whole thing in front of me. Ed, and I need you to sit down. Ed, because it isn't your boy. Ed, then we'll talk about it Monday, Dale had said. And now it was Monday, and he was telling me to sit down, and I was already sitting. It isn't Ethan, I said. It is not. Then who swore it? Walt Dale. I have been up since 4 o'clock in the morning, 2 days running. Say the name. I heard him take a breath, and I heard the chair, and then he said it. Victoria Ann Collins, signed May 15th, notarized in Denver County. Recorded here on the 19th. The horses were making noise over by the shed. I remember that I could hear them and that it seemed like a sound from another county. Say it again. Your daughter-in-law. She wasn't my daughter-in-law on May 15th. No, Dale said. She was not. She was 4 weeks and 2 days out from her wedding. I stood up off that porch step, and I walked out into the yard and stood there with the phone against my ear like an idiot in his own driveway. What's it say, Dale? You want the whole thing? I want the whole thing. It runs 3 pages. The meat's in paragraph 4, paper. Affiant states that on or about August 12th of last year, Affiant was present at a family gathering at the residence of Richard and Claire Collins in Arapahoe County, Colorado, at which the owner of record, Walter J. Hayes, discussed the disposition of the subject property. Affiant states that Mr. Hayes expressed an intention to convey the property in the event of a suitable agricultural purchaser, and further expressed that his objection to prior offers was based upon intended use rather than upon price. I didn't say anything, Walt. Keep going. Affiant further states that Mr. Hayes indicated the property had been held for long-term appreciation and that he considered patience a component of his investment approach. And that is when my legs actually did quit on me. I sat down in the gravel of my own driveway in my work jeans at 9:50 in the morning like a man who'd been shot at. 'Cause every word of it was true. That's the thing nobody understands about how these people work. She didn't lie. She didn't have to lie. I sat on that woman's couch and I said, out loud, in front of witnesses, that numbers work if you're patient. I said the buyer would have to want to farm it, not pave it. I said it because it was true and because I was being polite, and because a young woman had asked me a question with her eyes soft and her voice low, and I am a 67-year-old man who had not been asked a question in 6 years by anybody who wasn't selling something. Dale, I'm here. Every sentence in that paragraph is something I said. Long silence. I was afraid of that, he said. That was a Sunday night in August with photo albums on the coffee table. Walt, listen to me. It's still not a contract. Nowhere in 3 pages does she say you agreed to anything with anybody. That's why it's an affidavit of interest and not a notice of contract. It's a bluff. It's a very expensive, very well-drafted bluff. But it's on my title. It's on your title, and no bank touches me till it comes off. No bank, no buyer. No title company. Dale said. You are frozen until somebody either releases it or a judge strikes it. I looked at my hands. They were shaking again. The same way they'd shaken in that lobby. And I want to be honest with you about what was in me right then. Because it wasn't grief anymore. Dale, yeah. How much trouble is she in? He didn't answer right off. Dale, you're asking me a question I don't want to answer on a Monday. Answer it. An affidavit is sworn testimony, he said slowly. If we go in front of Judge Rasmussen and we put you on the stand and you say under oath that you never made any statement of intent to convey to any party, and she has to sit there and defend 3 pages she signed at 29 years old because her daddy's lawyer slid it across a conference table, then we are not talking about a real estate dispute anymore. Pause. We're talking about slander of title. And depending on how mean I feel like being that morning, we're talking about a referral to the Denver DA. For her, not for him. He didn't sign it, Walt, Dale said. That's the whole point. That is the entire architecture of the thing. He didn't sign it. Your boy didn't sign it. The only human being in the state of Colorado who put her hand on a Bible for this is the girl in the wedding dress. At 10:15 in the morning, I asked the question that changed everything. Dale, was there a draft? What? You said the 6 title pulls were building the affidavit. February to July. That's 5 months of drafting. Was there an earlier version? He got very quiet. Cheryl sent me the whole recording packet, he said. Meaning when they recorded it in May, they recorded the executed copy. But somebody at that firm is sloppy, and there's a cover sheet in the file with a red line reference number on it. Which means what? Which means their own document management system printed a line at the bottom of page 1, Dale said. And that line says version 4, prior signatory removed. I stood up out of the gravel. Prior signatory. That's what it says. Can you get version 3? Not without a subpoena. Can you guess? Dale Rooney has been a lawyer for 46 years and he has never once guessed out loud on a telephone. He guessed. Walt, they didn't put a bride on a sworn document because they wanted to. They put her on it because whoever they wanted first said no. I hung up on my own attorney without saying goodbye, which I have never done before or since, and I called my son in Kauai. It was 10:20 in Montana. It was 6:20 in the morning there. He answered on the second ring, which told me he wasn't sleeping either. Dad, did they ask you to sign an affidavit? Silence. 4 seconds, wind on his end, and something like a door closing, and I could tell he was walking somewhere he could talk. Where are you getting this? He said. Ethan, on May 15th, somebody at your father-in-law's firm put a sworn statement in front of your wife and she signed it, and 4 days later they recorded it against my ground. It has a version number on it, and the version number says somebody else was on it first. Was it you? He made a sound. I can't spell it. It was the sound of a man sitting down fast on something hard. Yes, he said, when April. His voice was wrecked. The second week of April. 2 days after I called you about the engagement. And you said no. I said no. Say what happened. Bregman put it in front of me. He's their outside counsel. He said it was a standard protective filing. And I read it. And I said, this says he told me things he didn't tell me. And Bregman said, did he or didn't he say his objection was use and not price? And I said, yeah, in a general conversation. And he said, then sign the general conversation. Ethan's breath came ragged. And I said no, and I said it twice. And Richard walked me out to the elevator and put his hand on my back and said, that's the right instinct, son. We'll find another way. And in March he'd already hired you. Yes, and in February he'd already put you on the entity. Yes, Ethan, I closed my eyes. Why do you think he put you on that entity? Because I'm the manager on the North Assembly. No. Dad, son, you've got 4 months in Agland. You told me that yourself. There are men in that firm with 20 years and they are not on that LLC and you are. I let it sit. You are not on there because you're capable. You're on there because when this thing goes wrong, there has to be a name on the paperwork and it cannot be his. That's not. He stopped. 20 seconds. I counted. He gave me the manager slot the week after I refused to sign, Ethan said. He said it was a promotion. I know he did. He announced it at the Tuesday meeting. He said, Ethan's going to steward the Hayes relationship. Steward, I said. Yeah, that's a nice word. Dad, I've got to sit down. You are sitting down. Then I've got to lie down. And then he said, does Vic know? That question. Out of everything, that question is the one that told me my son was still in there somewhere. She signed it, I said. I know she signed it. I'm asking, does she know what she signed? I don't know, Ethan. Because if she knew, she wouldn't have. He stopped again. He was doing that a lot. She's been weird since Friday. Since the dinner. She's been weird since the second it came out of her mouth. Weird how? She threw up in the bathroom at the reception. People drink. She hadn't had anything, he said. She's been off alcohol since May because of a medication thing. She threw up sober, Dad. At her own wedding. 40 minutes after Andy Miller asked her father a question in front of a table with cheesecake on it. At 11:40 in the morning, Richard Collins called me. I let it ring twice. Then I answered, and I want you to know I have never enjoyed anything less in my life than the 4 seconds before that man started talking. Walter, there he is, Richard. Listen, I'm going to say the thing everybody's too polite to say. You left. I did. Sunday morning, 5 in the morning, no goodbye. Claire's a wreck about it, is she? She's convinced she offended you with the photo thing. He laughed. Women, right? She's been running it back all weekend. Richard, yeah? You want to talk about the ranch? Beat. I always want to talk about the ranch, he said. And his whole voice changed pitch. And I heard the deal man come up out of the father of the bride like something surfacing in a stock pond. Since you brought it up, I had my guys pull comps this morning. This morning. I don't waste time, Walter. It's my only virtue, papers. Okay, so, I was low the other night. I want to be straight with you. I was low, and I'm man enough to say it. With the improvements and the water, in the current environment, I think we're at 4. 4 million. And Walter, that is a friendly number. That is a number that does not exist for a stranger. I stood in my kitchen and looked out at 4,100 acres. That's more than double what you told me Saturday, I said. Markets move in 36 hours, Walter. His voice went patient. Fatherly. He is 9 years younger than me, and he used a voice on me that I use on horses. Don't do the thing where you get cute about a number. I have watched 100 guys your age do the thing where they get cute about a number, and you know what happens? They die holding the dirt, and their kids sell it in probate for 60 cents. That's a hell of a sentence to say to a man you met 11 months ago. It's a hell of a sentence because it's true, and nobody else will say it to you. Richard, can I ask you something? Anything, Walter. What's an affidavit of interest? The line went so quiet I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, in a completely different voice. One with no warmth on it at all. Where'd you hear that term? May 19th, I said, recorded in Gallatin County. Parcels 7 through 11. Walter sworn by Victoria Ann Collins on May 15th in Denver County. Now hold on. Version 4, I said, prior signatory removed. I have never heard a man think as loudly as Richard Collins thought for the next 3 seconds. Okay, he said. Okay, that's a legal instrument. That's not a personal thing. That is a completely standard protective filing that our counsel. Richard, that our counsel recommended to protect the assembly against a third-party interloper. It is not aimed at you. It is aimed at Sacramento. Richard, what? You put your daughter's name on it, I said, because my son wouldn't put his. Nothing. You put a 29-year-old girl's sworn statement on the courthouse record 4 weeks before her wedding, I said, and then you stood up at a rehearsal dinner and made a toast about the ones who built and the ones who'll inherit. That's a very ugly way to characterize it prettier. He didn't, Walter, his voice dropped. I'm going to say something to you now as a man and not as a business partner. You are about to do something that hurts a lot of people who did not hurt you. Am I? There are 53 investors in this deal. There's 190 people whose jobs exist on paper because of it. There is a water option with a September 30th payment that will not survive a lawsuit. He paused. And there is my daughter, who is on a beach in Hawaii with your son, who has no idea any of this is happening, and whose signature you are currently holding like a loaded gun. You put it in her hand, and you're the one pointing it, he said. And God help me, that landed. That one landed, and he knew it landed, and he waited. Come to Denver, he said gentler. Wednesday, bring your lawyer. Bring whoever you want. We'll put a real number on the table. And this whole thing goes away, and nobody ever has to know a thing about it. No, I said, Walter, you come to Bozeman, I said. Wednesday, 10 o'clock, Rooney and Bates on Main above the shoe store. Bring Bregman, that's not in Richard, what? Don't bring my son, I said, and I hung up. At 1:20 in the afternoon, I called Andrew Miller. Mr. Hayes. Andrew, I need to ask you something, and I want you to hear the whole question before you answer, because your answer might cost you a job. Ask it. If I break this deal, what happens to your company? He didn't hesitate for even a half second, and that's how I knew he'd already thought about it in the airport. We lose about $2.4 million in soft costs and 18 months of work, he said. And I'd have to explain to my board why I put 11 letters in the mail and never once got in a truck and drove to Bozeman. Why didn't you? Because Richard told me you were unstable, he said. I sat down. He told the partner group in December that the legacy owner was a widower with early cognitive decline, that the son was managing your affairs informally, and that direct contact from outside parties was likely to spook you into a bad decision. His voice was flat and careful and furious. He said, and I am quoting a meeting minute, let's not go around the family. I sat in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, and I did not speak for so long that he said, Mr. Hayes, are you still there? He told 53 people I was losing my mind. He told them enough that nobody drove up, Andrew said. Which is the same thing, Andrew, sir. Do you want this deal to happen? I do. Do you want it to happen with him? Long pause. No, sir, Andrew Miller said, I don't. At 4 in the afternoon on Tuesday, Claire Collins called me. Walter, honey Claire, I've been sick about the photo. Have you? I have been physically sick about it. I have not slept, and I want you to know I found a frame. I found a beautiful frame, and I had Marisol print the picture at a place downtown, and it is on my mantle right now. Margaret is on my mantle in my own home. I closed my eyes. That's not the point, Claire. I know it isn't. You know? Walter, I'm not stupid. she said. Ed, and for the first time in 11 months I heard something real in that woman's voice. Ed, I have been married to Richard Collins for 33 years. Ed, do you think I don't know what a man looks like when he's got something running? Ed, what are you telling me? I'm telling you my daughter cried in a hotel bathroom on her wedding night and would not tell me why, she said. Ed, and I'm telling you that in May she came home from her father's office and she was gray in the face. Ed, and I asked her what was wrong and she said nothing. Ed, it's a formality. Ed, and I'm telling you that I have been saying that word to myself for 2 months. Ed, formality. Claire. Walter, what did he do? You need to ask him. Ed, I'm asking you. No, I said. Ed, you need to ask him. Ed, and you need to be looking at him when you do it. Ed, and Claire. Ed, I want you to notice what he does with his hands. Ed, she hung up. Wednesday morning, 10 o'clock, Dale Rooney's office above the shoe store on Main. Ed, I got there at 9:40. Ed, Dale had a legal pad. Ed, a bottle of water. Ed, and a manila folder about 1.5 inches thick. Ed, and he'd worn a tie. Ed, which for Dale is a war crime. Ed, you clear on what you're doing? He said. No, good. Ed, men who are clear on what they're doing make me nervous. Ed, at 10:04, Bregman came in first. Ed, 60 gray suit. Ed, briefcase. Ed, the flat, courteous face of a man who has never once been surprised. Ed, Mr. Hayes, Ronald Bregman. I did not shake his hand. Ed, I want to be honest about my failures, and that was one, but I did not shake his hand. Ed, and then Richard walked in. He stopped 2 steps inside the door. Ed, I want to describe what happened on that man's face, and I'm not going to be able to do it justice. Ed, he had come up a set of stairs above a shoe store in Bozeman, Montana, expecting to grind a rancher. Ed, and what he saw was a rancher sitting at the head of a conference table, with a lawyer on his right and a folder in front of him. And in about 1.5 seconds, he ran through every conversation he'd had with me since August and understood exactly one thing. Ed, that I had let him. Walter, Richard. You look well. Ed, I'm not. He sat down. Bregman opened his briefcase. Ed, before we begin, Bregman said, I'd like to establish that this is a settlement discussion under Rule 408. Ed, no, Dale said. Bregman looked sorry. I said no. Dale did not raise his voice. Ed, this is a meeting, Mr. Hayes called it. You can leave any time you like. Ed, Mr. Rooney, that's not how. Ron. Richard put 2 fingers on the table. Ed, let him talk, and they both turned and looked at me. Ed, at 10:11 in the morning, I said what I'd driven all Sunday and lain awake 2 nights putting together. Ed, on May 19th you clouded my title, I said. You did it with a sworn statement from a woman who was not yet a member of my family about a conversation that happened at your kitchen table while your wife showed me photo albums. Ed, you told a room of 53 investors that I was cooperative and coded me green on a page in an offering memorandum. Ed, and when a man from Boise wanted to drive up here and knock on my door like a human being, you told him I was losing my mind. Ed, Bregman's pen stopped. Richard didn't move. You want to say anything? I said. Ed, not yet, all right. I opened the folder. Then I'll finish. Ed, your option payment on the water is due September 30th. Ed, $9.2 million. You cannot make that payment on a North Assembly that has a hole in the middle of it, because your lender's term sheet has a parcel completion covenant in it at 92%. Ed, and without my 4,100 acres you are sitting at 83. Ed, Richard's head came up very slowly. Where did you get that? Ed, I opened my mail, I said, which was not the whole truth. Ed, the whole truth was that Andrew Miller had read me the covenant page over the phone at 9 o'clock the night before from a hotel room in Boise. Ed, and he had said, Ed, before he read it, Mr. Ed Hayes, if anybody ever asks, Ed, you found this in the offering memorandum they sent you, Ed, which they did send you, Ed, in January, Ed, to your house. Ed, now here's the part I want you to hear, I said. I don't want your $4 million. Ed, Bregman said, Mr. Hayes, I'm not done, Ron, Richard said. Ed, I don't want 4, I said. I don't want 31 either, and there's a man in Sacramento who put that number on paper. Ed, I don't want your money at all, Richard. Ed, and that is the thing you have never once been able to fit in your head about me. Ed, and it is why you are sitting in a room above a shoe store this morning. Ed, the clock on Dale's wall did that thing clocks do when nobody's talking. Ed, so what do you want, Richard said. 3 things. Ed, name them. 1.
That affidavit comes off my title by Friday at 5 o'clock.
Ed, full release. Ed, recorded. Ed, at your expense. Ed, with a stipulation drafted by Mr. Ed Rooney that no party asserts any interest of in kind in Hayes Valley Ranch. Ed, Bregman said that's achievable. 2. I turned a page. My son comes off Cottonwood Ridge Holdings. Every entity. Every manager designation. Every signature block. Every piece of paper with his name on it. And I want an indemnity from your firm, covering him personally for anything done under that authority since February 11th. Richard laughed. One syllable, no humor. You want me to fire him. I didn't say fire him, because that's what that is, Walter. You take his authority. He's got no seat. Then give him a seat that doesn't require him to deliver his father, I said. You're a creative man. Be creative. Bregman was writing fast now. And 3, Richard said, and this is where I stopped. Because number 3 was the one I'd rehearsed 40 times in the truck and could not say without my voice going. And I sat in that chair, and I thought about a woman in Denver who was on a beach in Hawaii with my son, and who had thrown up sober at her own wedding, and I thought about how easy it would be. 2 sentences. I had them ready. 3. Your daughter signs a sworn recantation. And if she doesn't, we file, and the DA in Denver can decide what he wants to do about page 3. Dale had drafted it. It was in the folder. It was the top document in the folder. Ed looked at Richard Collins across that table, and I said 3. You tell her. He blinked. Your daughter doesn't know what she signed. You're going to tell her. Not Bregman, not a letter. You out loud. With your mouth. Before she gets off that plane on Saturday. Walter, and you're going to tell her the version with your name in it. Richard Collins looked at me for a long moment, and something happened behind his face that I have thought about ever since, because it was not anger and it was not shame. It was fear. That's it? He said. That's your third thing? That's my third thing. You could bury her. I know what I could do. Ron told me in the car you'd file criminal referral by Monday. Ron was wrong. Why? And I said the truest sentence I had in me. Because she's married to my son, I said. And I'm not going to be the reason he has to choose. At 10:51, Richard Collins stood up, and his hands were not steady. And he said, give us the room. Bregman said, Richard, give us the goddamn room, Ron. Dale looked at me. I nodded. The 2 lawyers went out and shut the door, and it was just the 2 of us. He stood there with his knuckles on the table. You knew Saturday, he said. At the reception, with the cheesecake, I knew Saturday morning. You let me offer you 1.8. Why? Because I wanted to hear the number a man says when he thinks nobody's ever going to check, I said. That number tells you everything about him. You can build a whole life off of one number like that. He sat down. For about 30 seconds he didn't say anything at all. And then he said, in a voice I hadn't heard from him. My father lost a hardware store in Pueblo in 1981. Okay, he was the most honest man I ever met, and he died owing money to people who came to his funeral. He looked at his hands. I decided when I was 14 years old that I was never going to be the man other people felt sorry for. Richard, what? You've made a lot of money, I said. And I've never once heard anybody say they were glad to see you coming. He didn't answer that. At 11 o'clock he stood, and he put out his hand, and I looked at it. And then I shook it, because I am my wife's husband, and she would not have let me do otherwise. Friday at 5, he said. Friday at 5. He got to the door, and he turned around. Walter, for what it's worth, that night at the rehearsal dinner. When she said it, don't, I'm going to say it anyway. I heard it, and I thought it was funny. And then I looked at your face, and I thought, huh, that's a man who's used to it. He shook his head slowly. And I felt sorry for you. For about 4 seconds, standing there, I felt sorry for you. I know you did. I've never been that wrong about a person in my life. Richard, I said, you weren't wrong. I am used to it. He left. Friday at 4:40, the release recorded. Dale called me from the courthouse steps like a kid. Saturday at 2 in the afternoon, Ethan and Victoria landed in Denver. Saturday at 9 at night, my phone rang, and it was my son, and all he said was, he told her. Where is she? She's in the car. Whose car? Hers, Ethan said. Dad, she left. She got in the car 20 minutes ago with a bag, and she wouldn't tell me where she was going, and she wouldn't let me come. I stood up. Ethan listened to me very carefully. When did she leave Denver? At like 8:40. I looked at the clock on my stove. 9 hours. Denver to Bozeman is 9 hours. Sunday morning, 6:10. I was on my porch with a cup of coffee when I saw the dust come up off the county road. It came up slow, which is how you know a car doesn't belong out here. People who know the road drive it fast because they know where the washboard is. That car came up at 15 miles an hour like it was afraid of what was at the end of it. I stayed in my chair. She pulled in beside the truck and shut the engine off, and then she sat in there for about 4 minutes. I counted it on the porch clock, 4 minutes, hands on the wheel, staring at my house. Then she got out, no makeup, hair pulled back with an elastic. Sweatshirt, jeans, and a pair of white sneakers that were about to get an education. She had driven 9 hours through the night by herself, and she looked exactly like what she was, which was a 29-year-old woman who had been awake for a day and a half. She stopped at the bottom of the steps. I signed it, she said. Not hello, not I'm sorry. That was the first thing out of her mouth, standing in my driveway at 6:15 in the morning. I know you did, I said. I signed it and I didn't read it. I know, don't say I know like that. Her voice cracked all the way through. Say something else. You want coffee? She put her hands over her face and stood there in my driveway and made a sound I have only heard twice before in my life, both times at hospitals. Victoria, I can't come in your house. Why not? Because you were kind to me, she said. And I want you to yell at me. And if you don't yell at me, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. Well, I said, I'm not going to yell at you. So you can stand out there and be cold, or you can come in and be warm, but either way I've got horses to feed at 7. She came up the steps. At 6:22 in the morning, my daughter-in-law sat down at the same kitchen table where my son used to do long division. I put a cup in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it and didn't drink it. Tell me what he said, I told her. Your father. He came into the guest room at 10 o'clock at night. She was talking to the tabletop. He shut the door. He never shuts doors. And he said, sweetheart, there's a thing you signed in May, and it's become a problem, and I need you to hear it from me before you hear it somewhere else. Okay, and I said the formality, and he said yes. The formality. She swallowed, and then he said it was recorded against your ranch, in a courthouse, with my name on it. What else? She looked up at me, and here's where the morning turned, because what she said next was not what I was ready for. He said Ethan approved it. I set my cup down. Say that again. He said Ethan reviewed the document and approved the approach, and that they used my signature instead of his, because Ethan's a manager on the entity, and a manager's affidavit would look self-serving. She was watching my face very carefully now. And I understood, all at once, why a woman drives 9 hours through the night. He said my husband knew. Is that why you came? Yes, not to apologize. No, she said. I came here because I have been married for 8 days and I needed to know if the man I married put my name on that instead of his. I want you to understand something about the next 10 seconds, because everything else in this story hangs off it. I had it right there, the whole thing. All I had to do was let it stand. Let her believe it. Let her go back to Denver with her father's version in her chest. And she'd have hated Ethan and run home to Cherry Hills, and I'd have had my son back. 34 years old and wrecked. Sitting at this table where he used to do long ent division, needing me again. That thought went through me clean and fast, and I am ashamed of it to this day. Victoria, I said, look at me. She looked at me. In April, 2 days after Ethan called me to say he was engaged, a lawyer named Bregman put that affidavit in front of your husband and asked him to sign it. He read it. He said no. I kept my voice level. No, twice. And your father walked him to the elevator and put a hand on his back and said, that's the right instinct, son. We'll find another way. She didn't move. That was version 3, I said. Your version 4. No, yes, no, because he... I know what he said. He looked at me and he said Ethan knew. Yes, he did. And then she understood it. I watched it arrive. I watched a woman who had spent 29 years inside that man's house understand for the first time that she was inside the fence with him. She stood up so fast the chair went over backward. He put it on me, she said. Yes, he put it on me, and then when it broke, he tried to put it on my husband's. Yes. So I'd stop asking. That's right, she stood in the middle of my kitchen with her hands opening and closing, and then she said something I have never forgotten. I have to call my mother. Not yet, I said. Why? Because your mother already asked him, I said, Wednesday. And she was looking at his hands when she did it, because I told her to. Victoria sat back down on the floor, not in a chair. On the floor of my kitchen, with her back against my cabinets, in a sweatshirt, at 6:40 in the morning. At 6:55 I went out and fed the horses, because they don't care what's happening in your kitchen. Ed, she came with me. She didn't ask. She just followed me out with her arms wrapped around herself and stood there soft while I broke a bale, and after about a minute she said, "Can I do something?" Ed, "You can carry that." She carried it, got hay all down the front of her sweatshirt and didn't brush it off. Ed, "They're bigger than show horses," she said. "They work." Ed, "Yeah." She almost laughed. "You told me that in a steakhouse and I thought you were being a jerk." Ed, "I was being a little bit of a jerk." "Yeah, you were." Ed, "We stood there and watched them eat." "I threw up at my wedding," she said. Ed, "I heard. Ethan told you?" "He did. I've been on something since May," she said. Ed, "It's called sertraline. I started it 11 days after I signed that thing, and I told everybody it was for sleep, and it was not for sleep." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. Ed, "I signed a piece of paper in a conference room, and then I couldn't eat right for 2 months, and I didn't know why, and I told myself it was the wedding." Ed, "Everybody said it was the wedding. My mother said it was the wedding." Ed, "It wasn't the wedding. No," she said, "it was that I knew." Ed, "Some part of me knew the whole time, and I just kept walking." Ed, "At 7:30 we came back inside and I made her eggs, because at some point you feed a person whether you're mad at them or not. And she ate about a third of them." Ed, "Then she said, 'Can I do the other thing now?' "What other thing?" Ed, "The apology. You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She put her fork down. Ed, "Walter, I called you a broke old dirt farmer in front of 41 people. Ed, "You did. And I have been telling myself for 9 days that I meant it warmly." Ed, "Did you? That's the thing," she said. "I did. That's what makes me sick." Ed, "I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was doing a bit." Ed, "I was giving the table a version of you that would go down easy in that room, because I knew you wouldn't go down easy on your own, and I did it fast and I did it first so nobody else had to." She looked up. Ed, "I was managing you like a seating chart." I sat back in my chair. Ed, "Say that again." "I was managing you," and there it was. Ed, "That's the honest one. That's the one nobody ever gets to, because nobody wants to." Ed, "Victoria," I said, "can I tell you what actually happened at that dinner?" Ed, "Please, the words didn't do it. I've been called worse by better men." Ed, "What did it was you took hold of my wrist." She stopped breathing. Ed, "You reached across that table and you took my wrist and you pulled me forward. I held up my arm." Ed, "I'm 67 years old. I haven't been pulled anywhere since I was 9. Ed, "And I stood there with my hand out to your father, and I understood that in your head I was not a man in that room." Ed, "I was an item on the run of show." She started to cry, and it wasn't pretty crying, and I let her do it. Ed, "I'm going to say the last part, and then we're done with it," I said. Ed, "The problem was never that you thought I was poor." Ed, "I know, you don't yet. Listen." I waited until she looked at me. Ed, "The problem is that you thought poor was the end of the sentence." Ed, "You heard rancher, you heard old truck, and you stopped reading." Ed, "That's not a money thing. That's a habit. And it doesn't come off in one bad weekend. It comes off over about 20 years, and only if you work at it." She nodded and kept nodding, way past when it made sense. Ed, "Okay," she said, "okay. How do I start?" "Ask somebody a question you don't already know the answer to," I said. Ed, "And then shut up while they answer it." At 8:40 in the morning, a second set of dust came up the county road. Ed, "Ethan's rental car, driven the way a man drives when he's been on the interstate since midnight." Ed, "He came in the driveway too fast, got out, and stopped dead when he saw her car." Ed, "She was already out the door. I stayed on the porch." Ed, "They stood about 10 feet apart in my driveway, and neither of them said anything for a long moment, and then he said, 'You didn't answer your phone.'" Ed, "I know, Vic, you left. He told me you approved it." Ed, "Ethan's whole face came apart. He what? He told me you read it, and approved it, and that they used my name because yours would look self-serving." Ed, I said no. He came toward her. Ed, "Victoria," I said no in a conference room in April. Ed, I said it twice. Ed, I have been sick about it since. Ed, I know. Bregman put it in front of me, and I said, Ed, Ethan, I know. She was crying again. Your father just told me. Ed, your father sat in that kitchen and had every reason on earth to let me believe it, and he told me the truth instead. Ed, my son looked up at me on that porch, and I want to tell you what was on his face, because I've been chasing the word for a year, and the closest I can get is this. He looked like a man who had just found out the floor was there. Ed, Dad, he said. Feed's done, I said. There's coffee. Ed, he came up the steps and he stopped in front of me, and he did not hug me. Ed, he put his hand out. I looked at it. You want to shake my hand? Ed, I want you to decide, he said. That's the point. Ed, I'm not going to grab you. I shook his hand. And then I pulled him in anyway because I'm a hypocrite and I'm his father. Ed, at 9:15 the three of us were at my kitchen table, and that's when I put it on the wood. Two halves of a photocopy, creased soft from 9 days in a jacket pocket. Ed, Ethan picked them up and fit the edges together. What is this? Ed, read it. He read it. Then he read it again, and I watched his eyes go across the legal description twice, and then I watched him get to the names. Ed, Ethan and Victoria Hayes, he said, joint tenants. Ed, 412 acres, I said, the creek bottom. Ed, the cottonwoods, Victoria said. Wait, what is this? Ed, it's a wedding present, I said. It's been drawn up since June. Ed, the original's in a firebox in Dale Rooney's office, and it has been sitting there this entire time. Ed, she put her hand flat over her mouth. I had it in my jacket at the rehearsal dinner, I said. Ed, nobody said anything. I was going to give it to you at the reception. Ed, I had a note with it. I rewrote the note 4 times, and I still wasn't happy with it. I looked at my son. Ed, your mother and I ate lunch off a 2 tailgate down in that bottom the summer we were 31 and had $1,100 in the bank. Ed, that's the piece I was giving you. Ethan set the paper down very carefully like it might go off. You tore it, he said. I tore a photocopy, I said. Ed, at 1:20 in the morning in a hotel room by myself like a child. Ed, then I fished it out of the trash can 20 minutes later, and I couldn't have told you why. Ed, why did you? Because I've never once been able to throw away a thing with your name on it, I said, and I wasn't about to start at 67. Ed, Victoria got up and went outside. I heard the screen door, and then I heard her out there on the steps, and Ethan started to get up, and I said, leave her. Ed, Dad. Ed, son, that woman drove 9 hours to find out if you'd sold her out, and in the last 3 hours she's lost her father and gotten you back, and been handed 400 acres by a man she insulted in front of 41 people. I picked up my coffee. I'd let her sit on a step. At 11 o'clock that Sunday, Richard Collins called my house. Ed, not my cell, my house line, which rings about 4 times a year. Ed, I looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the phone. I picked it up. Ed, Richard, is she there? She is. He let out a breath that had about 100 pounds in it. Ed, Claire's been up since 4, I imagine so. Walter, his voice was ragged in a way I'd never heard. Not even in Dale's office. Ed, I need to say something, and I need you to not help me say it. Ed, all right. I told my daughter that your son approved that document, he said. Ed, Wednesday night I sat in a room with you, and I said I'd tell her the version with my name in it. And then I got home and I looked at her and I didn't do it. Ed, I did the other thing. I did it in about 1.5 seconds, Walter. I didn't even decide to. Ed, I know. You know, Richard, I've spent 41 years around animals, I said. Ed, you never have to guess what a thing's going to do under pressure. Ed, it does what it's built to do. Silence. That's about the worst sentence anybody's ever said to me, he said. Ed, is it wrong? No. And that was the closest that man ever got. And I want to be honest with you and say it was close enough, because I was not owed a transformation. Ed, I was owed the truth on a courthouse record, and I already had that. Ed, put her on, he said. No, I said. Walter, she'll call you when she calls you, Richard. Ed, she's 29 years old, and she can work a telephone. Ed, he was quiet. Claire's moved into the guest room, he said. Sorry to hear it, are you? Yes, I said. I've buried a wife. Ed, I don't wish an empty room on anybody, including you. Ed, he hung up without saying goodbye. I've come to understand that's just how that man ends calls when he's got nothing left to close with. Ed, the thing settled out over the following 7 weeks, and I'll give it to you fast, because the money is the least interesting part of this whole story, and always was. The release recorded on that Friday at 4:40, exactly like he said. Ed, Dale called me from the courthouse steps, and he was so pleased with himself he could hardly talk. Ed, Ethan came off Cottonwood Ridge Holdings on the 11th of August, with the indemnity, signed by 2 partners. Ed, then he quit anyway. He called me on a Tuesday to tell me, and I said, what are you going to do? Ed, I don't know. That's the first honest answer you've given me in a year. Ed, yeah, well, he laughed. Andy Miller called me. Ed, did he? Ed, did you? I did not, I said. Ed, and that was true. Ed, Andrew Miller has never once in his life needed me to tell him what's decent. Ed, the deal itself went through in October, and it did not go through with Richard's group holding the paper. Ed, Northbridge restructured the North Assembly. Collins Whitmore stayed in as a minority participant because 53 investors had real money in it, and I was not going to burn 190 jobs to punish one man's pride. Ed, I did not sell my ground. I want to be clear about that because everybody assumes I did. Sacramento's 31 million is still, to this day, the largest number anybody has ever put in front of me, and I have never once been tempted by it. What I did was a 99-year agricultural lease to Northbridge, with a perpetual conservation easement recorded ahead of it. The easement means the ground can be farmed and cannot be paved. Not by them, not by me, not by my son, not by his children, not by a bank on the worst day of somebody's life in the year 2090. Andrew Miller sat at this kitchen table when we signed the term sheet, and he read the easement language twice, and then he set it down and said, "Mr. Hayes, you understand this costs you about $22 million. It does, may I ask why? Because I don't want the money, I said. I never wanted the money. I wanted the ground to still be the ground. He looked around my kitchen. At the cabinets Margaret painted in 1993. At the drawer. Second one down. Left of the sink. Which is now empty except for a rubber band and a church key. My father was a lineman, he said. He'd have liked you. He'd have thought I was a stubborn old fool. He'd have liked you and thought that, Andrew said. The lease pays me an annual number I am not going to say out loud because it's nobody's business, and because saying numbers is how this whole thing started. I'll tell you what I do with it. I put a well on the Pruitt place for a family that was about to lose it. I paid off the note on the Bellamy sisters' hay ground. I fixed the roof on the Methodist church in town, anonymously, and it stayed anonymous for about 4 days because there is no such thing as anonymous in Gallatin County. And I still drive the truck, 294,000 on it now. Ethan started with Northbridge in November. He's not a manager of anything. He took a step down and about 40% less, and he moved to Bozeman, 22 minutes from this porch, and the first month he was here he drove out 4 times and didn't ask me for one single thing. The 4th time, he stood in my barn and said, "Dad, can I ask you something?" Go ahead. Weren't you angry when they looked at you like that? I thought about it for a while. I was for about 4 days, I said. But son, being angry is like leaving the gate open. You do it once and you spend the whole rest of the week getting cattle out of the road. He laughed, his mother's laugh, that short surprised bark. That's a very rancher thing to say. Well, I said. I am one. Victoria comes out about every other weekend. She started that first month by doing exactly what I told her to do, which is ask people questions and then shut up while they answer. She asked me about calving. She asked me about Margaret. She sat at this table and asked me what my wife's voice sounded like, which is a thing nobody had asked me in 6 years, and I could not answer her for a full minute. In April she started riding again, not hunter jumpers. She rides my sorrel gelding who does not care one bit about her posture. In May she got a job, not with her father. She's the development coordinator for a land trust in Bozeman, which pays her about a third of what Denver would. And about 4 months in, she called me and said, "Walter, I need to ask you something, and you're allowed to say no." Ask it. There's a family out by Manhattan. 3rd generation. And they're going to lose it. And I know you know how the easements work. And I know that you know everybody. And Victoria, yeah, you want to come out Saturday and we'll drive over there? She was quiet on the phone for a second. Yes, she said. Bring boots. I have boots now. I know you do, I said. I bought them. Claire Collins came out here in September. Alone, drove it herself, 9 hours at 63 years old. She stood in my kitchen and put a wrapped frame on my table and said, "I'm not staying." I just wasn't going to mail it. I unwrapped it. Margaret, 1996. On the tailgate. Squinting. Holding a 9-year-old Ethan by the back of his shirt so he wouldn't fall off. I had it printed properly, Claire said. There's a man in Denver who does restoration work. It took him 5 weeks, Claire. Don't be nice to me, Walter. I can't take it. I'm going to be nice to you. I know, she said. That's the problem with all of you people. She stayed 2 hours. She asked me about Margaret and she listened to the answer, which from her was a thing I don't think she'd done with a stranger in 30 years. And when she left, she hugged me at the door and said, he's in therapy. He hates it, he goes. That's more than most. It is not nearly enough, she said. But it's more than most. They're still married. I have opinions about that, and I'm going to keep them. Richard and I speak about twice a year, and it's business, and it is scrupulously polite, and neither one of us has ever once mentioned a rehearsal dinner in Wyoming. But last Christmas he sent me a card, handwritten. Ed, 4 words under his signature. You were right, Walter. Ed, he didn't say about what. He didn't have to. That's the whole thing. Ed, that's all of it. Except for one evening this past March, which is where I'll leave you. There were 11 of us here for dinner. My son, his wife, Ed, Dale Rooney and his wife Peg, Andrew Miller up from Boise and his 2 boys. Ed, the Bellamy sisters, both of them past 80. And a woman named Danielle with tattoos up one arm, who I tracked down and hired to photograph a barn raising, and who has since done 4 more jobs for people in this valley because of it. Ed, I have the photograph she sent me on the bookshelf behind me. Ed, 2 men on a piece of taped floor, my son's hand on my back. Ed, halfway through dinner a neighbor came by to drop off a chain I'd loaned him. Ed, a man named Coy who'd never met any of them. Ed, and he stood in the doorway with his hat in his hand. Ed, and Victoria got up before I could. Ed, come in, I'm Victoria, Coy Delacroix. Coy, this is my husband, Ethan. And then she put her hand on my shoulder. Ed, not my wrist, my shoulder, and this is Walter Hayes. Ed, Coy nodded at me. We've met. He's my father-in-law, she said. Ed, he's got 4,000 acres out here, and he's kept every inch of it out from under a bulldozer, and he taught me how to ask a person a question. She squeezed my shoulder once. Ed, he's the best man I know. And I sat there at the head of my own table, in a house my wife picked out in 1985, and I thought about a tent in Jackson Hole and 41 people going quiet by 2 clicks. Ed, here's what I know now, at 68 years old, and I'm going to say it plain because I've earned the right to. Ed, anybody can respect you after they find out what you're worth. Ed, that costs them nothing. That's not respect, that's arithmetic. Ed, respect is what a person gives you before they know. Ed, it's what the kid at the valet stand gave me. Ed, and the maintenance man behind the dumpster. Ed, and a waitress in Idaho Falls at 5:40 in the morning. Ed, and a girl with tattoos who mailed 4 photographs to a stranger because she thought he ought to have them. Ed, they didn't know one thing about my land. They just decided I was a man. Ed, so let them look at your boots. Let them look at your truck and your hands and the year on your jacket, and let them do their arithmetic, and let them be wrong. Ed, because the ground doesn't argue. It just sits there, being worth exactly what it's worth. And so do you.